Hey everyone. I thought I would take a little break from working to make this tutorial video about something that I've been using quite a bit recently. And so one of the problems we have in our apps is that sometimes we have a bunch of asynchronous tasks. So like, let's say we are we're rewriting a bunch of images, sending a bunch of stuff to our server, whether it's Firebase or some JSON API that you have. And we want to do one thing at a time in like a list, and we want to know when that task is done. And so if we just create that code and write it normally, things won't work in the order that we always want. So I'm going to show you how to use something called a dispatch group to kind of work it out. So I'll show you what I mean. All right. So let's create some kind of function, right? Func some async task, and we're going to pass in an index, and it's going to have its own completion. It's going to be asynchronous, so it's going to be escaping, and it's going to give us a string. Pointing to void. All right. And so to make it asynchronous, we're going to add this dispatch queue. And so we're going to say in 1 second, execute the following code. And the code's really simple. We're just going to send something to our completion, and it's going to be a string that says async task, and we'll give it the index of the task. Done. All right. And then all we need to do is we're going to create a for loop. So this is how you would iterate through a bunch of tasks like this. So I'll say for index in 0 to 5. Some async task, and we're going to pass in our index, and we're going to get our result, and then we're going to print the result, and we're going to keep track of how much this works. Oops, it's another dot there. So I'll also add a counter. And I'll say here, counter plus equals 1. So each time the counter increments. And then when everything is done, I want to print our result. Now, the way I'm doing it right now is wrong, and I'm going to show you why. So when our iteration is done, I'm going to print all tasks done, and I'm going to print what's in our counter. All right. So if we run our code now, we can see that what happens is that we get our all tasks done message first, and then after that, we start counting off our asynchronous tasks. And what happens is that our code instantiates this task, instantiates this counter, which is 0. It starts riding through this for loop, and it begins all these asynchronous tasks. So it fires them off 0 to 5, and then it finishes firing them off, and it prints the all tasks done. The problem is these tasks don't actually get to their completion phase by the time we've ran through the entire for loop. And so what that means is that the counter isn't actually incremented by the time we run this piece of code at the end here. So in my code, what I was basically doing to talk to a server, I would upload a bunch of images, or I would download a bunch of images, and then I would want to kind of pass them back into my app. So my app would load them up as soon as they're ready. And that wouldn't work here. So how do we make this work, right? We are going to add something called a dispatch group. So I'll instantiate it here. I'm going to say let group equals dispatch group. And by the way, I saw this online on Stack Overflow. a couple of times, and I feel like it was a little bit wrong. So I want to. There's one line of code here that really clearly needs to be inserted. So this dispatch group basically tells the code, don't run our completion or whatever our final task is until everything in this group is done firing. Okay, and so at the entrance to each one of these iterations in our list, we're going to say group.enter. All right, and so this tells it, all right, we're entering this group. Then to print out our information at the end, we would say group.notify, and which queue do you want to go to? So we're going to notify the main queue, again, the main dispatch queue.main, and we are going to execute our code. And the code we want to execute is this. And so there's one thing that's missing here. So if you see, if I run this right now, it doesn't quite work. It runs all the tasks, but it doesn't actually run this. And so the one piece of code that's often missing in tutorials for how to do this is this little part here. So when we enter our asynchronous task and when we get the completion from it, we want to add this code that says defer group.leave. So what I'm doing here is I'm entering my asynchronous task, I'm calling it, and then I'm inside the completion for the asynchronous task. And inside of the completion for the asynchronous task, I'm going to put in this line to say defer and then group.leave. And what this tells it is once you're done running this code over here, leave this iteration, this block in the dispatch group. And so once this runs a bunch of times, once it's instantiated, so it's going to be instantiated 5 times, and then we're going to leave 5 times or 6 times because it's 0 to 5. Then our dispatch group is going to know that we're all done. So if we run this code right here, it works. So we have all of our asynchronous tasks, and then at the end, it says all tasks done. All right. So again, the important parts here is we have some kind of asynchronous task, something where we're waiting for a completion as opposed to it returning a value to us. It doesn't return anything. It just has a completion. And if it runs in a for loop, a bunch of times it will be started, but it won't finish by the time the for loop finishes. And so what we do is we create this dispatch group, and we enter the dispatch group every single time in the iteration in the list. And then we do this group.leave every time the asynchronous iteration, the completion that we want to actually finish, is done. And then we do this group.notify to actually send a result out. So we tell it which thread to do it on, and then we tell it what actual code to run. All right, and that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys liked it. Leave a comment, or whatever.